In the lean years following America's stock market crash, unemployed salesman Charles Darrow invented a board game based on buying and selling properties in Atlantic City, New Jersey. The game allowed players to make money by renting and developing property in a rags-to-riches journey, with 3 of the 6 game tokens representing poverty, and 3 representing the wealth that the players could aspire to. The game's impact was immediate, and eventually made Darrow a millionaire. In the 1930s, the game was licensed to Waddingtons in the UK, who developed the London version. Locations such as the Old Kent Road, Pall Mall and Mayfair became familiar to generations of British players, as Monopoly became a staple of family entertainment. Now, though, there is a bewildering choice of Monopoly versions, as in recent years the concept has been extended to everything from The Simpsons to the National Lottery. One development has seen regional cities having their own boards, including the limited edition version of the City of Oxford. So let's take a town and gown tour of the Oxford version and see how the Monopoly concept has translated to the city of dreaming spires. The first roll lands us in the affluent thoroughfare of St Giles, a strange choice for the cheapest block on the board. Stranger still is the choice of pub used as an illustration. Instead of the famous Eagle and Child, celebrated haunt of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, we have the much more mundane Horse and Jockey, a pub so obscure it was knocked down shortly after the game was launched. Sharing the bottom of the bill slot is the Trout, a pub situated several miles outside of Oxford in the village of Wolvercote. This upmarket watering hole is a favourite of Inspector Morse, and again, a strange choice for the entry-level pricing of Oxford's property ladder. The next roll takes us to St Aldate's, in the centre of Oxford. The 3 squares on this block draw a straight line from Tom Tower in the south, up St Aldate's Hill past the Oxford Museum, to the Carfax Tower, all that remains of St Martin's Church. From here, we go on down the Corn Market to St Michael's Tower, a Saxon church, and the oldest building in the city. Another roll, and we're at the parks. Oxford has a variety of parkland, botanic gardens and sculpture trails, but the area known specifically as the Parks is actually part of the university playing fields. 2 squares in this block feature college sports grounds, with the echoing vastness of the Kassam Stadium sitting uncomfortably alongside them. It's back to the university for the last square, with the sports ground at Iffley Road completing the set. At least the historical significance of this site makes it a fitting location for inclusion on the board. By now it's becoming apparent on this tour of Oxford that the properties are grouped by theme and not by the established notion of ascending value. This makes for some rather strange bedfellows, with the genteel residents of Iffley, with its sports grounds and guest houses, having to gaze upstream to the far more cosmopolitan reaches of the Cowley Road. The chosen location on Cowley Road, however, is not the ethnic traders, but the rather soulless Templar Square shopping centre, a bleak modern precinct with the usual anonymous collection of multiple outlets. Also in this block is the slightly more upmarket Clarendon Centre in the middle of Oxford, which again houses a typically bland selection of national retailers. Much more colourful is the third featured property, the Oxford Covered Market. This is a vibrant, bustling community of individual traders, and much more a feature of the essential Oxford than its 2 stablemates. Rolling the dice again lands us on one of the more optimistic squares, free parking. If you're very lucky, it is possible to find some in the quieter backwaters, but in Oxford itself, you'll need a second mortgage. Throwing a 5 lands us in Broad Street, home of Blackwell's bookshop. This is a maze of rooms and bookshelves with a whole annex dedicated to local authors. But when such local talent includes J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Philip Pullman, Colin Dexter, Lewis Carroll, it's easy to see why. This block seems to have a literary theme, with the next square dedicated to the imposing bulk of the Oxford University Press in Jericho. But, strangely, the third property is the Morrel's Brewery in St Thomas Street. Or at least it was there until it got converted to a new housing development. But at least the signage remains in place. Monopoly is like life. Sometimes you get rich, sometimes you end up bankrupt, and sometimes you get sent to jail. Fortunately, Oxford has its own jail, and even more fortunately, it's now no longer a prison, but a prestigious hotel and restaurant, so a visit here is no great hardship. We'll pay the fine and cast the dice again, this time landing on one of the 4 transport squares. Whereas London has a variety of rail stations to choose from, there is just the one in Oxford, so the remaining 3 squares have had some rather more mundane locations chosen. First is a rather uninspiring park and ride car park, which again unsurprisingly fails to qualify for the free parking square. From here we travel to the unglamorous Gloucester Green bus station, starting point for innumerable journeys down the M40 to London. Next is the railway station. Rather featureless structure this, rebuilt in the 1990s. Finally, a more esoteric form of transport is illustrated by the boat rides available at Salter's Boatyard at Folly Bridge, though strictly speaking, this is more of a leisure activity than an access point to the city. Rolling 11, we leap ahead to the yellow squares and land back in Jericho at the Phoenix Picture House in Walton Street. This is very much an art cinema, ignoring the Hollywood blockbusters in favour of independent productions and classic films. The yellow block seems to have an entertainment theme, with the next property being the distinctly upmarket Quad restaurant in the High Street. The local BBC office in Banbury Road forms the third element, an odd choice of location as Oxford has a wealth of theatres that would have given a much more local connection. Double 1 takes us to an even more bizarre square. Whereas the traditional Monopoly board has electricity and waterworks as the 2 utilities, the Oxford version settles for Biffa Waste Disposal and OneTel. Neither of these has any particular association with Oxford, and a nagging suspicion emerges that maybe some of these squares have more to do with corporate sponsorship than local Oxford culture. Rolling a 6, we're back on safe ground again, with the block representing academia. The traditional colleges form a major part of Oxford structure, but they've been joined in recent years by a brash new breed of modern universities, such as the former Oxford College of Further Education. This is now a university in its own right, with an idyllic setting housing one of the city's less memorable buildings. On the opposite end of the scale is Headington Hill Hall, now part of the law faculty of Brookes University. This was originally the home of the Morrel brewing family, but for 32 years was the home of Robert Maxwell, who rented it from Oxford City Council as what he called the poshest council house in the country. Last shake of the dice and we're on the home straight, visiting the 2 most salubrious properties on the board. First, the Randolph Hotel, another favourite of Inspector Morse, and occupying a prime site opposite the Martyrs' Memorial. On the opposite corner to the Randolph, we come to the last property on the board, the Ashmolean Museum, oldest public museum in the country. This backs on to the corner of St Giles, where we started the tour, So we have the perplexing arrangement of the most expensive and the cheapest properties both in the same location. The board features a silhouette of some of Oxford's famous sites, but most of these don't actually make it to the game itself. Where are the iconic Oxford landmarks of the Radcliffe Camera, the Sheldonian Theatre, the Bridge of Sighs, Christchurch Cathedral, and even the Headington Shark? When you recall the brand names and corporate logos that did make it to the board, however, it may be that the game's capitalist principles have intruded onto the real-life design of the board. Maybe corporate sponsorship has helped finance the regional versions of the game, which goes some way towards explaining the locations featured. This has given a slightly surreal flavour to the Oxford version, and maybe the rules of Monopoly have influenced the commercial viability of the game. If so, is this a case of life imitating art, or of art imitating life?